Welcome to my latest video. Today I'll show you how to set up the Nikon Z6 II to take HDR photos. And this step-by-step instruction does not only work on the Z6 II but also on the Z6 because the camera's menu doesn't differ from one variant to the other. Further on, we will save these settings we make in this tutorial to the user setting banks U1 and U2, so that you can change between HDR workflow and HDR photographing and, for example, portrait shooting on M or A mode without having to set up all these settings again, so that you can switch fast between them. Let's start.
First of all, we make sure we have applied the general camera settings in the right way. So this means we start from the program dial in the mode A. Now we adjust the correct aperture. I use an aperture of 8 for most HDR shootings. It's not always 8, of course. I differ to 6 or to 12, and I guess 8 is a good way to start in the middle and then opt to one or another way. So aperture set to 8. Then we are going to set a suitable ISO number. I'll start with ISO 200 when shooting freehand, or of course ISO 100 when shooting from tripod. I'll go for 200 here. Now we'll have a look at the menu of the camera, and we'll start in the photo shooting menu. It's the yellow icon here, and we start with a storage folder. To distinguish between normal shots and HDR shots for HDR RAWs, sometimes I use a separate storage folder to save HDR photos in. So I call this storage folder HDR Z6. The file naming is HDR here as well. We'll skip a few of these setup points here. Of course, we use the FX image area for the whole sensor size. We use image quality fine. Image size is L as well for JPEG as for RAW. We don't have to care about JPEGs. We are only shooting RAW later. The NEF RAW recordings, we use compression, yes, but we use lossless compression, so that we don't lose any picture information on that. Don't use uncompressed. There is no advantage against the lossless compressed one. It's just a bigger file size. We use a 14-bit color depth on our pictures to have high bandwidth of information and color grading possibilities. ISO sensitivity settings. ISO sensitivity, I set freehand. I start with 200. You can set it to 100 as a starting point. I deactivate auto ISO sensitivity control. The white balance I always set to cloudy because this is most neutral, and you don't want any automatic to change white balance between HDR shots. That would ruin the whole bracketing row later. So set it to cloudy. Picture control, we set it to neutral. It doesn't matter because we are shooting RAW, and these settings don't affect RAW, but they affect the preview. And so I always set it to neutral so that I can later change colors and change pictures better. We skip color space. We deactivate active delighting. We set long exposure noise reduction to off. High ISO noise reduction normal. Vignette control off. Diffraction compensation off. Auto distortion control off. Flicker reduction shooting off. Those are all settings we do later when editing our photos. The metering I always mostly use matrix metering. It is because I'm often shooting landscapes in architecture, and for that matrix metering is okay. We don't have to care about flash control, flash mode, flash compensation because we aren't shooting with flash when doing HDRs. The focus mode is now set to AFC. It doesn't matter because later when we are shooting HDR, we set the focus to manual so that no focus points change during a HDR RAW shot. The AF area mode doesn't matter for that reason as well. It might be used for initial focus setting before switching to manual. Okay, now it gets HDR specific with auto bracketing. Inside the auto bracketing menu entry, we set auto bracketing set to AE. Don't set it to AE and flash bracketing. AE is the right option. So now we can select the number of shots we want to do. I most of the time use 5 or 7 with an increment of 1 step between shots. So with 5 shots, you do 1 normal metering shot, then 2 underexposed ones and 2 overexposed ones to have the most detail captured. And later we combine these 5 shots to 1 image in editing. To have more bandwidth and to capture more details in depths and highs and lights of the shot, you can opt to 7 shots with an increment of 1. But to be honest, don't do this when shooting freehand. There is risk of camera movement or movement in the image you want to shoot. If I'm shooting freehand, I mostly go for 5 steps. So, okay. We can skip all of these, multi-exposure off, HDR off. This is something I often get asked, why do we set HDR to off? Because we want to shoot our bracketing row manually with all the settings we are entering now. This function here means that the camera does 5 shots and already combines them in camera to 1 image. And we can't change what comes out of it in post-editing. So that's not what we want to do. This is a setting for beginners. I don't know why they put it in a Z6 II, because I guess nobody who owns such a camera would use in-camera HDR, but I don't know. Interval timer shooting is off, time-lapse movie off, focus shift shooting off, silent photography is off. This was everything inside the photo shooting menu, and now we switch to the individual menu. Here we have not so much to do, only 4 points, and we start with the options in the C menu, the green one, timers AE log. Here we go to the self timer, and those settings are important when shooting from tripod. I set the self timer delay to 2 seconds so that I don't have any movements in my tripod. The number of shots should correspond to the number of bracketing steps we do. I set 5, but you can also say 7 if you opted for the 7 shot bracketing row in the menu entries before. I'll keep it at 5. The interval between shots is the shortest one with 0.5 seconds. Perfect. And then we can go to the next menu, which is interesting for HDR photography, which is E7. It's a bracketing order. As you remember, I said the camera is doing 5 shots or 7 shots, depends on what you opted for. The first one is the normal metering, then an underexposed, then 2 underexposed and 2 overexposed. You can change the order here, but I'm fine with the standard one, because then I'm sure that at least the standard metering shot is successful, even if later somebody is driving through the image or somebody's walking through the image and I have to repeat everything. So I use the normal bracketing row. So that's all the settings we have to make. And now we save these settings to the user bank U1, so that we don't have to change these settings every time we want to shoot HDR and switch back to normal portrait photography. That would be very frustrating. So we go to the setup menu and now we say save user settings. Where do we want to save it to? We wanted to save it to the program dial on U1. I hit OK, I saved the settings, and from now on these settings we just configured as saved to the bank U1. So now we can change everything in the A mode and later just switch back to these settings again when using U1 mode. As a tip from my side, if you want to have the possibility to switch between not only the 5-shot bracketing row, but also the aforementioned 7-shot bracketing row, then change these settings to 7 shots and just save them to U2. So in this way you can fast change between HDR workflow with 5 shots, with 7 shots, or standard photography on program mode A, M, S, P or auto. Perfect. So we are fine to go. I set the camera to the program U1, and if we hit the info button, then for freehand shooting we can go to the high speed mode here, continuous H, and then when we hit the button, the camera does 5 shots in a row very quickly. We can have a look at them. This is shot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can combine these images later to have an HDR photo. Perfect. But what if we are shooting on tripod? Just hit the I button when in shooting mode. Change the mode here from continuous high speed to self timer with our 4 declared 2 seconds of delay. Okay, now we hit the button over here, the camera is waiting 2 seconds, and now it's taking 5 photos automatically on the tripod. We can also have a look at these photos now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 photos. That's how easy HDR photos are with Nikon Z6 and Z6 II. The menus are nearly identical. So when we are now finished with shooting HDR, we can hit the program dial and switch back to any other mode we want. For example, the M mode, A mode, S or P mode, and shoot a normal standard photo